Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly think they can do what they want, when they want, because they're special. And in today's episode, it's all about entitled Karen bosses getting taught lessons they won't forget. So if you've ever had a horrible manager, you'll love this one. I hope you enjoy the stories, don't shake your heads too hard, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. So, a few years ago, I got hired on as a general manager for a small corporate chain specializing in ice cream. They weren't doing well, and they needed someone to boost their sales. I was hired on with the promise that once I doubled the sales of the store, I'd get a substantial pay raise, bonus, you name it, if I could save the store from closure. Well, I hit that goal 5 months into the job. During my 6-month evaluation, I was given a small raise, not even half of what I'd been promised, and the bonus would come after a year of profits. I was told that the store was still catching up, so they couldn't afford the raise they'd previously quoted to me. If the store continued on its upward track, I'd get my raise at my 1-year evaluation, and a big bonus. I just thought to myself, yeah, no. So I start looking for other jobs, and I stopped going above and beyond in my duties. The assistant manager Karen, whom I'd hired, noticed this, and she secretly went to my boss and she told him I didn't care for the job anymore, to get me fired to get my job. After a month, it worked. They were going to demote me and promote her to GM before I quit. A few months later, a friend sends me a screenshot of a post on Facebook where a girl was warning people to not work at the shop because they won't pay you. So I reach out to her, and I found out that she hadn't been paid for a week's worth of work, and the new GM Karen wouldn't do anything about it. The corporate number wasn't publicly listed, but I still had it saved in some emails. So I gave it to her, and I told her she ought to let corporate know what's going on in that store. The store was shut down by the end of the next week. It was closed for a month before having a grand reopening with new owners and management. I got back at them in a 2 birds, 1 stone kind of way. What a great little revenge that was. And props to OP for sticking up for themselves and those who were mistreated. But yeah, that's karma for you, right? And let that lesson be learned. Never ever mess around when it comes to paying someone what they're promised. And this person comments, I remember when I was a kid and my mom worked for 3 months without pay because the place wasn't making a profit and they needed things to ship out to make payroll. When those people did all that work, the manager took the profits and went back to Canada, shutting the building and the company down. What to learn from this is promises don't mean crap, even if they're on paper. Don't work if you're not getting paid, and never trust the company. And while we're on the topic of not messing with people's money, guys, listen to this next post where a business owner absolutely gets destroyed. So in the year 2003, the company I was working for closed down, so I sought out new employment. I was a machinist by trade with a great reputation, so it took me less than a day to get a job. We'll call the new place Spiral because of the specialized tools they made. Anyways, I start out as one of the operators. The place was owner-operated, meaning the owner was there daily. He had a floor supervisor that was actually pretty nice. After I'd been there around a year, the owner and a super had a falling out, and the super left. For whatever reason, the owner, who we'll call Dick, told me I was in charge. And here's a little backstory on Dick. The guy was in his 60s and he started the company out of his garage. He ends up buying a huge chunk of land and he turned it into an industrial park. This is all while he was in his 20s. By now, he was one of the richest guys in the state. He was also the biggest a-hole I've ever met. The guy treated every employee like garbage, except for me and this one other guy. If anyone dared to talk to each other during work hours, the guy would scream at us. With that said, my promotion kind of financially trapped me though. Dick would have no problems talking to me though. He was the braggy sort of rich guy while paying us the bare minimum. During one of our talks, he let it slip and I learned he cooked his books. You see, the industrial park was owned by an entity that he created, while the company Spiral was owned by another. He would always make sure that the park entity charged Spiral just enough in rent that it looked like the company was barely staying afloat. He also bragged that he had taken a bunch of industrial waste and he buried it on his property at home because it cost so much less than paying someone to properly dispose of it. He made my life hell over the next decade. He was always keeping my pay just high enough that I couldn't afford to leave, telling me that because I had no degree from college, he didn't have to pay me a dime more than what I was worth to him. The guy was essentially calling me dumb in many ways while treating me and my guys like crap. I ended up with a 95% turnover rate on my employees, and I'm not exaggerating. We end up having to go to temp agencies, and towards the end, even they refused to send me people. I had to do some careful wording, but my duties end up swelling to the point where I convinced Dick to let me say that I was the plant manager. And this right there was huge. I have no degree from college, but I now had a title and the experience. With that, I start looking for a job in earnest. And after 6 months, I found one for a lot more money and with benefits because Spiral had none. Now, over my time at Spiral, I had seen everyone that gave them notice be told to leave on the spot, and the company that hired me insisted that I give them the 2 weeks notice. So I said I would, but I didn't. At the end of my last day, I sat at my desk, and I sent an email to the head of OSHA and the state's EPA, the Environmental Protection Office. These were 2 men that I had gotten to know well. I filled them in on all the violations that Dick had disclosed. I also sent an email to the state's attorney about the books. I then left my keys on my desk with a paper under them that simply read, "I quit." Now, I never found out if the state's attorney went anywhere, but the contact at OSHA let me know the company ends up with $150,000 in fines. And the guy from the EPA dug up half of Dick's property before he admitted to where he buried the waste. Last I knew, the guy ended up in jail and his business had to shut down. Once again, guys, you mess with someone's money and they will find ways to get back at you. And honestly, in a situation like this, I'm glad things turned out the way they did. Like, not only was the owner a complete a-hole, what the guy was doing was super duper shady. And I do believe that sooner or later it would have caught up with him. That said though, guys, the same thing happened at the old company I used to work at. The owner denied a pay raise to one of my coworkers, and the guy literally called OSHA and reported a crap ton of violations. And let me tell you, a surprise visit from OSHA while in the middle of a job that had to be rushed out due to construction deadlines, oh boy, you can imagine how that went down. And this person comments, "Oh, I love this, well done." Something similar at my job a few years ago. I had to put up with a bunch of BS over the years because of complacency. When I called out my supervisor and his boss on violating health and safety standards, I was let go for insubordination. I live in a right-to-work state that actively fights against unions. I left, but I'd been keeping a record of all their violations over the years, and I sent it all to OSHA that evening. I found out in less than a year, both of them had been fired. The only regret is I didn't do it sooner. So a couple of years ago, I worked for a small team within a larger organization that ran a rather niche grant program. It was literally my boss, who we'll call Charles, me, and 2 part-time consultants who did our finances/bookkeeping. Now, my boss and I had great rapport. He had hired me to essentially run large aspects of our program, and he gave me pretty much unilateral oversight of the key elements of it. From program design and development to execution, the guy was a great manager in this respect. He provided a lot of mentoring and guidance, but mostly got out of my way and only wanted me to escalate the big stuff that I felt rose to the level. Now, while I didn't love the job itself, I loved having so much freedom. I was sort of bridging that gap of moving from a young professional to a mid-career professional. And so, this offered a lot of growth opportunities. The one thing that made my boss great was he always had my back. So that said, one day I was in the office pretty much alone. My boss was on the board of a few organizations and he was off at a half-day meeting. Our offices were right across from each other, so I typically could see him when he came and left, and I could hear his phone when it rang. That morning, his phone was ringing and ringing and ringing, and then finally, my phone rang. It was the executive director of one of the organizations we worked with. The guy was maybe in his 70s, and the conversation went something like this. I pick up the phone and I say, "OP speaking, how can I help you?" The guy, sounding frustrated, says to me, "I've been calling Charles all morning, but he's not answering." I respond, "Yes, he's at a half-day board meeting. Is there something I can help you with?" Hearing me say that, the executive director says, "I doubt it. Maybe you could just check his calendar and put a call with me on there for when he's back." I respond, "I'm sorry, I wish I could, but I don't have access to his calendar, so I can't see what he has this afternoon, and I can't add things to his calendar. I'm sure he'll be back soon." The guy then cuts me off and says, "That's unacceptable. How does his damn secretary not have access to his calendar? Who sets his meetings?" Now here's the thing. While I'm my boss's employee, I am not his secretary. I don't have access to his calendar, and my boss sets his own meetings. Not only that, but I had corresponded with and even met this director in the past. My signature block and business card clearly say Program Manager, as does my bio on our webpage. Alas, this wasn't the first time that someone's assumed that I was my boss's secretary. But it does happen. I was in my late 20s at the time, and as a young professional woman working for a man, it seemed a common misconception. Usually, it's not a big deal, and normally, I just clarify my role and people feel embarrassed and we go about our lives. So I just clarified my role for the executive director. I say to him, "Just to clarify, I am not Charles' secretary. He doesn't have a secretary. I'm actually the program manager. Charles manages his schedule on his own. If you want to shoot us both an email, I'll make sure that he responds and sets up a time to talk to you. Otherwise, when he comes back, I'll let him know that you called so you can arrange a meeting." The executive director then cuts me off again, and he says, "Well, I have an important question for him. It's unacceptable that I can't set up a meeting with him, and I also can't get an answer to it right away. How is this good client service?" And yeah, the guy's yelling at me at this point. I respond, "Well, I'm the program manager. So why don't you tell me what your question's about, and let's see if I can help you." The executive director then explained that he called to talk about the application process and requirements for a program of ours, one that I actually ran. Not only that, but the nature of his questions were not so complicated that it necessitated escalating to my boss. These were things I could easily help him with. So I say to him, "Well, you're in luck. I'm actually the one that runs the program, not Charles. I've designed that application process, and I would actually be able to answer your questions with a lot more detail than Charles would. He would just defer you to me. So why don't you tell me what questions you have, and I can answer them?" The executive director then takes a long pause, and in a patronizing tone, he says to me, "Young lady, now I'm sure you're very bright. And I'm sure you want to be helpful, but I'd really prefer to talk to Charles, as he probably knows more than you. So why don't you take a message for him for me, okay?" At this point, I'm kind of pissed. I'm about to tell him where he can shove his message when I see my boss coming down the hallway. So I tell the executive director that he's in luck. I see Charles right now. Let me go and tell him that you're on the line and then get back to you. So with that, I put the executive director on hold and intercept my boss. I kind of explain the situation, and my boss chuckles to himself, and then says, "Transfer him over." I then transfer the call, and I can hear my boss pick up the phone. He says, "Chuck speaking. Oh, hi there, executive director. How can I help you?" "Yes, Yes, I was at a half-day board meeting. You have questions about which program?" "Okay, what's your question?" "Oh, you want to know about the application process and criteria." Okay, well, have you spoken to my program manager, OP? Well, she's actually the one who manages that program. Yes, she actually designed the application process. Oh, I'm so sorry. I wouldn't be able to answer that specific question. I don't know the answer to that. Yes, that's right. She manages the entire program, and she's the expert on it. So let me go see if she's in her office. With that, I can hear my boss put the phone on hold. He then walks out to me, and he asked me how my day's going, what my plans are after work, etc. We chat for a few minutes before he walks back to his office and gets back on the phone. He then says, "I'm so sorry, Executive Director, but it appears that she must have stepped away from her desk. Why don't you send her an email and I'm sure she'll get back to you." No, again, I'm so sorry. I'm not kidding. She's really leading on that program. You'll have to speak with her. I could transfer you to her voicemail if you wish. Okay, well, do you have her email? Great, so go and send her an email and I'm sure she'll get back to you on all your questions as soon as possible. The guy didn't email me for a couple of days, and when he finally did, I helpfully walked him through all the details of the program that he was interested in. Yeah, I just want to say that I love how OP's boss handled all of that. Like forcing the guy to wait to talk to OP when she was probably the last person he wanted to deal with was a frickin' power move right there. Like, this is the boss that everyone should have. Someone who treats employees well, sticks up for them, and respects them. And what's funny is the guy took a few days before emailing OP. Like, I bet he was trying to figure out the solution on his own rather than having to deal with a lowly female secretary, right? So I work with a large organization having multiple branches in every state across the country. I'm the head of one such branch. My boss, the regional manager, controls around 15 branches in a region cluster. That said, during August this year, I'd asked my boss for a 5-day leave for September, which he had promptly granted. I then inform HR about it, suggesting him to temporarily arrange for someone to run my branch for the week. HR assured me that there was plenty of time to arrange for my temporary substitute, so I didn't think much about it. And here's the thing. My dumb self didn't imagine it would be crucial to get leave approved in writing, because before this, no one had ever faced something like what I was about to experience. Come the last working day before I go on my leave, I ask HR who's gonna take care of my branch in my absence. He flatly stated that there was no one available in the region cluster who could cover for me, as many employees in our region are on leave because of festivities this week. I respond, "You're telling me this now?" Anyways, I fail to understand how that's my problem, given that my leave was granted a month ago. He then says, "Have a discussion with your boss." So I call him up. Apparently, HR already had a talk with him regarding this matter before I even called him. The regional manager says, "Listen, how could you intend to go on leave during this time when we're under so much pressure due to this sudden staff shortage? On top of that, our company's audit is due next month." I tell him, "But you already approved my leave 1 month ago." He then says, No, I must have said I would think about it." I respond, "Absolutely not. I wouldn't have booked my tickets and planned my travel to my hometown to see my parents if you hadn't confirmed the leave." My boss then says, "Are you questioning me? Are you the boss or am I the boss? Because last I checked, I'm the boss and I have the final say." This went to and fro for a while, and I was exasperated from this argument. By the end, I felt really humiliated that I almost had to beg for leave. I just say, "Fine, I won't go." And at that point, I felt my dignity was more important than a few days off work. My manager just says, "Okay." So with that, my leave stood canceled, my tickets had to be canceled, my money was wasted, and I was left utterly exhausted of this BS. A few days later, we get a notification for a yearly interstate staff soccer tournament being arranged by corporate. If selected, I would be playing for my state, and the tournament from the selections to the final would go on for a month. Soccer happens to be one of my favorite sports, so guess who applied and got selected in the state team? Now, here's the funny thing about sports and activities that are arranged by our company's corporate center. The top management takes these seasonal events very seriously. If you're a participating employee, nothing or nobody on this planet could make you go back and sit in your chair and mind your job instead of participating. So as it appeared, I was all set to go on a month-long tour across the country playing soccer without having to worry about managing a branch and getting paid in the process. And yes, extravagant events like these are not unheard of in big Fortune 500 companies. My organization is a large conglomerate and the third largest employer in our country. Still, it always beats my logic that they can spare some 150 to 200 employees for a month for fun. Yet, there are some regions that are plagued with staff scarcity. Anyways, my boss's office was eventually informed about my participation in the event and was advised to excuse the participant from his duties until the tournament was over. The day before leaving, I drove down to my regional manager's office to formally inform him from my end about me competing in the event and my ensuing month-long absence that's to be expected. The guy looks expressionless and he just asked me, "Why did you really participate?" To which I respond, "Well, you see, had I happened to be at my hometown on a short leave this week, I wouldn't have been able to participate in this tournament at all, or even try for the selections. I'm sad I couldn't go on that leave." The defeated look on his face was priceless. Yeah, that is a great way to get back at a boss, but in my opinion, OP should have just stuck to their vacation plans and taken the leave. Like, it was approved, and OP bought the plane tickets and made plans, and no crappy job is worth canceling all of that. And like OP said, it's not their fault the boss tried to be scummy. And if they're as understaffed as they say, they can't afford to fire OP so easily. Also, I just want to add that there's nothing worse than someone flaunting their title and saying to an employee, "Well, the last time I checked, I'm the boss and I have final say." Like, what a jerk thing to say, right? And nothing makes you want to not work for someone more than when they say something like that. I'm just glad OP got back at their boss in the end. So, although I didn't have control over how this played out, I still smile when I recount this story, and I thought it would fit here. So in 2010, I worked at a corner drugstore as a department cashier. I was 21 years old, and I hated working Sundays, which were my Fridays. I'll also be the first to admit that I could have been a better employee, but I knew this wouldn't be my career, and I was just coasting until I graduated. One Sunday, I felt awful. That Friday, I was a bit under the weather, but when Saturday came around, I felt okay, and then Sunday hit me like a sack of bricks. About 2 hours into my shift, I asked my shift manager, Ryan, if I could go home. Now, Ryan was your typical power-tripping manager. The guy pretty much hated all the workers, and he loved to torment us on a regular. So I wasn't surprised when he snarkily responds with, "Well, you need someone to come in and finish your shift if you want to leave." And I just want to add that this wasn't policy. The guy was just being an ass about it because he didn't like me. He wanted me to suffer. So I said, "Fine, no problem." I called one of my coworkers and she came in for me. When I got home, I started coughing up blood and I passed out. My boyfriend forced me to the ER that night, and I was diagnosed with strep and admitted to the hospital. That Monday, one of the nurses informed me that I'd be in the hospital for at least a week, so I called my store to let them know. Again, manager Ryan hated hearing the news. He says to me, "You'll be out for a week for strep? Are you serious? I had strep once, and after 24 hours of meds, you're not contagious anymore, and you can go to work, so why can't you?" I just respond, "Yeah, do you want to talk to the nurse because she's right here?" He then replies, "No, we'll see you when you get back." The guy was clearly irritated by the news, but there was nothing he could do. But what I hadn't told him, as I didn't know at the time, is I was admitted because the hospital suspected something much worse. I was visited by a doctor later on that Monday, who also explained that he would like to perform a bone marrow biopsy in the following day or two. Now, I had no idea what that was or why he'd want to do one, except that my blood counts looked weird. I had the procedure done and continued recovering from strep. On Tuesday, the doctor from the day before pays me another visit. He says to me, "Hey, so we got the results of your bone marrow biopsy back. You have an aggressive form of leukemia that requires immediate treatment. We'll be sending you to a hospital in a big city to start chemo tonight." So yeah, my world was turned upside down. I called my best friends, all of whom I worked with, and I invited them to the hospital to share the news. One of my friends that had a shift that afternoon broke the news to the store that I have cancer. I spent 28 arduous days in the hospital fighting for my life. My mom had visited my store a few times during my hospital stay, and she talked with my store manager, letting her know what was going on. My store manager was very understanding and supportive. The other managers never said a word to me, my mom, or my friends about the situation. When I finally got out of the hospital, I went to my old store to pick up my maintenance cancer meds. As I make my way back towards the pharmacy, bruised, bald, and with a bright purple PICC line sticking out of my arm, I turn down aisle 10, and who do I see? Ryan, stocking vitamins. I say, "Oh, hi, Ryan," and the look on his face was priceless. He says to me, "Oh my goodness, are you okay? How are you feeling?" I respond, "I'm great now, thank you." It's a good thing I left early that Sunday, and I ended up in the hospital, so they found the cancer. The whole situation was absolutely delicious. Despite everything I went through, the feeling of complete vindication when they had to face my cancer-ridden self was incredible. I never ended up going back to work there, and I had to file disability, because the next 5 months of my life were week-long hospital stays, followed by constant transfusions, checkups, and even a case of sepsis that almost killed me. But I still remember Ryan's face, and it brings a smile to mine. What a story that was, guys, and for all who are curious, OP does pop into the comments to say that they are absolutely fine now. It's been almost 15 years since the diagnosis, and there's no sign of it coming back, so that's wonderful news. With that said, I hope Ryan decided to be a bit more understanding to the world after the lesson that he hopefully learned from OP. Just don't treat your workers like garbage, guys. Be nice to everyone because you just never know. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, I know it's been a while. It's an r/malicious compliance, where if you enjoyed this one, it's also bad bosses getting taught lessons they won't forget. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.